Okay, I think we'll get going. Welcome. We're thrilled to have everybody join us today. I'm Dale Buscher with the Women's Refugee Commission, and I am joined today by Amy Slaughter from RefugePoint. We represent the organizations that launched the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative 2 years ago at the UN General Assembly and have been working with many of you on the call to bring this to life. We are thrilled to have you join us today for the launch of the Self-Reliance Index, the first global tool to measure progress of refugee households on their paths to self-reliance. It has been a labor of love and quite a process, which Amy will talk about shortly. Joining us today are over 400 participants, including representatives from over 80 NGOs, such as Mercy Corps and BROC and World Vision, representatives from UN agencies, dozens of colleagues from UNHCR, also UNDP, FAO, ILO, government representatives, representatives from the World Bank, foundations, academics, and practitioners. We have people connecting in from Amman, Erbil, and Istanbul to Kampala, Juba, Dakar, and Ouagadougou, from Cox's Bazar to Quito, from Berlin to Minneapolis. Welcome. This index is part of a bigger, highly ambitious initiative, the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative, that focuses on measurement, programming, and advocacy to advance self-reliance. The initiative aims to measure programs to see if our clients are achieving self-reliance, and by doing so, to figure out which programs work best for whom, and to advocate for donor support for self-reliance programming early and everywhere, as well as for that enabling environment with refugee hosting countries. At the Global Refugee Forum, 15 organizations, most of you are on this call, joined together with the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative and pledged to reach 250,000 refugees with self-reliance programming. That's part of the initiative's vision of reaching 5 million refugees in 5 years with self-reliance programming. It's a wildly audacious goal, but one we're extremely excited about. Today, this matters more than ever. We've seen that when livelihoods are lost, and when those livelihoods did not prepare people for future shocks, how suddenly households are struggling just to eat. This crisis highlights the need to build resilience that includes dignified livelihoods that allow families to save for the future and to have resources to cope with crises such as these. We hope you'll join us in doing better and join us in helping us reach every refugee who wants to rebuild their life. I'll now hand it over to Amy to talk for a few minutes about how we arrived here and who worked with us along the way. Amy.
Thanks, Dale. Today we are celebrating the culmination of a process that started in earnest 3 years ago, but whose origins date back quite a bit further. Both Women's Refugee Commission and RefugePoint had identified a major gap in the tools available to refugee service providers. That is, while we each measured the impact of our own projects, we had no way of knowing the collective impact that our programs were having on refugee households, or whether our interventions were adding up to improved well-being and self-reliance for our clients. So we each developed our own measurement tools to try to fill this gap, and when we discovered that we were working on similar things, we decided to join forces to benefit from each other's knowledge. We then invited other partners to join us to widen the circle of learning, and we began convening regular calls. One of the first tasks of this new community of practice was to map other related measurement tools. We found a lot of great tools and drew inspiration from many of them, a sampling of which you see in this slide. But we didn't find any designed specifically to help refugees improve their lives in countries of asylum where they lack permanent residency, even though that is where the vast majority of refugees in the world are. This was the specific gap that we sought to fill. The community of practice met in person in Nairobi in 2017 and began the process of developing the index that we are launching today. Participants from 15 different entities joined that workshop, and today we have around 28 entities regularly participating in calls. Developing the Self-Reliance Index was a hugely collaborative effort, as you will see from the long acknowledgments page on its inside cover. We were really pleased with the level of participation that this project attracted, including partners that have stayed with it from the very beginning. We've been on a long journey together, and I wish we could all be in the same room today, raising our glasses together, but Zoom will have to do for now. We want to express our deep gratitude to the donors that made this work possible. The IKEA Foundation was an early and significant donor and was later joined by others, most notably G. Barry Landry, the Landry Family Foundation, the Elma Relief Foundation, the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, the Imago Dei Fund, the Alchemy Foundation, and the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation. We should also mention the US State Department, who supported earlier work done by the Women's Refugee Commission that helped lead to this. We also want to thank our partners in the community of practice, whose logos you see on this slide, with particular thanks to UNHCR's Livelihoods Unit in Geneva and the Poverty Alleviation Coalition. And we want to thank the agencies that pilot tested the index in the field and our academic partners that helped with the data analysis and revision process. It's impossible to mention everyone by name that contributed to this, but please do check out the acknowledgements page. Today, we're very excited to share this work back with the community that helped create it, and we hope you'll be pleased with the result. And now I'll pass to Kellie to unveil and walk us through the Self-Reliance Index.
Great, thank you, Amy, and thank you to everyone for joining us here today in the celebration of this joint accomplishment. As mentioned by Amy and by Dale, the Self-Reliance Index was developed with input from numerous organizations to fill a gap that existed in global refugee response. While many of us were interested to better understand whether our refugee clients were achieving self-reliance, we did not have tools in our collective humanitarian toolbox to measure this. Today, I will provide an overview of the Self-Reliance Index, associated products, and support we have available. I will then bring together our panel to discuss how their organizations have become thought leaders on this issue. As noted by Amy, in early 2017, our recently convened community of practice came together in Nairobi to build consensus around the idea of self-reliance for refugees. And we agreed to the definition provided here. This definition, adapted from UNHCR's Self-Reliance Handbook, highlights both the economic and social needs of refugees. And it highlights the importance of sustainability or resilience for refugees, a component of self-reliance that is especially important today. From that point in 2017, when all we had was an agreed definition, principles, and an outline of key domains, the SRI has gone through many iterations with continuous input and feedback from refugees, from practitioners, and experts around the globe, leading us to today's launch. As you can see here on the map, the SRI was tested in numerous locations: Ecuador, Jordan, Kenya, and Mexico, with vastly different refugee situations, economies, and policies. In Kenya, for instance, refugees have been in Kenya since 1992. And there are also experiences in Mexico where we met with refugees who had only arrived a couple of weeks prior. Our partner organizations listed here, Asylum Access, the Danish Refugee Council, HIAS, the International Rescue Committee, Mercy Corps, and RefugePoint, all contributed their time and their resources towards supporting the development of this tool to ensure that it speaks to the diversity of refugee experiences. And I can say from my own experience that I met refugees with vastly complicated and complex situations. And this tool was there to be able to bring those ideas together. In 2018, academic advisors Lindsay Stark and Alana Seff came on board to advise on the Self-Reliance Index and to guide the development process in building a more reliable and a more valid tool for global use. And this culminated in the soft launch that kicked off in August last year, which many of you will remember. We've posted up here the learning goals from that experience. We wanted to learn about the reliability, the validation, and make sure that the scoring of the index really reflected the lived realities of refugees themselves. We also wanted to learn more about the training and the user guide to make sure that it really spoke to the needs of the practitioners who would be using the tool, and also to make sure that the tool itself could be integrated into existing monitoring systems. The Self-Reliance Index Soft Launch Learning Review is available on the website, and we really welcome you to go to the website and look this up. You'll also see the link in the chat box. So please, if you'd like to learn more about the reliability, the validity, and the testing of this tool, please check out that learning report. And now to the Self-Reliance Index itself. The Self-Reliance Index was designed with a few key concepts in mind. First and foremost, the SRI was designed to be easy to use. We really recognize that there are many things that we would like to know about a refugee household situations. What we are focused on here, though, is not what we want to know, but what we need to know to be able to measure self-reliance. We want to respect our clients' time and the practitioners who are using it. You'll see that there are 4 key components to the Self-Reliance Index: biographic information, 12 score domains, open-ended questions, and an interviewer rating. There's 12 score domains: housing, food, education, healthcare, health status, safety, employment, financial resources, assistance, debt, savings, and social capital. Reflect the index itself, that scored index itself. We believe that those components added together give us a picture of whether a family is achieving self-reliance or not. And we expect that the index will be used in its entirety to respect the integrity of the tool and to respect the integrity of that score. The SRI in its entirety can support practitioners in designing and providing effective services, can be used to target populations for assistance, and to highlight service gaps and funding priorities. A second principle of the SRI is that it is designed to be holistic. You will note that the domains are diverse, and while many organizations and entities provide different support and services, we are interested in understanding how all these disparate inputs add up at the household level. You can see we have a picture of a beautiful family here, and we know from our experience that there are a number of instances where perhaps the mother in this photo receives some support for a grant, an entrepreneurship program. The father in this photo might be getting some skills development, while the children are getting support to go to school or with their health care. What we want to know through the Self-Reliance Index is, how does all of that add up? How does that add up to that family achieving self-reliance or not? And that's the third principle of the Self-Reliance Index, is that we want to chart change over time. This is not expected to be used just as one simple one-off assessment, but does it chart a course for this refugee household? Is their situation changing over time? And if it's not, or if it's getting worse, what does that also tell us? Can it tell us about the design of our programs? What can it tell us about gaps in our programs? And what can it tell us about the policy environment that this household is living in? And maybe we need to make more effort in terms of advocacy if we see a situation is not changing. So it's really important that we look at these things holistically so we can see how to design our programs and being really reflective of what refugee households need. And as mentioned earlier in the definition of self-reliance, we are interested in finding about economic and social needs of the household. We expect that the Self-Reliance Index, as you can see on the screen here, can be used as a complement to other tools, or it can be used as an overall tool that organization use in its entirety to monitor their programs with just using as a standalone product. As I noted, the Self-Reliance Index was designed to be a universal tool, and so we are thrilled to say that the Self-Reliance Index, the scoring for the index, the short briefing on the index, and the user guide are all available in a variety of languages: Arabic, English, French, Spanish, and Swahili. And you can go to the website. We'll once again post that link in the chat box so that you can download, just after the webinar, download these tools. You'll also note at the bottom that we have the tool available in a number of commonly used data platforms: ComCare, Kobo, and ODK. And we hope that you will take the time to download the tool and the user guide so that you're able to use it. The SRI is a new tool, and we have high expectations for its use. And we welcome you to download that website. Given the generous support from our donors mentioned by Amy, the RSRI can support training, data analysis and visualizations, and our continuous learning with interested partners. We're currently building on current in-person training modules and developing distance training and ongoing remote support for partners. If you're interested to use the SRI, we will work with you and your team to provide support for its successful implementation, and for all of us to begin building a global picture of refugee self-reliance around the world. We also recognize that right now, many services are being provided by refugee-led organizations who are closest to their communities. We will be holding an event for refugee-led organizations later this month to share the SRI. If you are from a refugee-led organization, please reach out in the chat box so we can be in touch and make sure that you're included in that event. I would also like to note that there is significant interest in using the tool with other displaced populations, such as IDPs, resettlement communities, and a number of today's participants work with these populations. And we welcome the opportunity to work and learn with all of you to learn about the SRI in these different contexts. Additionally, age, gender, and diversity inclusion, including people with disabilities, are essential considerations in our approach to self-reliance. We will actively learn from organizational leaders in these areas to ensure that we are focused on elevating the best practice for age, gender, and diversity inclusion with the SRI and with self-reliance programming more generally. So we look forward to working with all of you to continue to learn about how this tool works in different locations and with different populations. So today's event provides a general overview of the Self-Reliance Index. And for those of you interested, we will be holding a deep dive event on June 18th. In that event, we will provide an opportunity to review each component of the tool in detail. Information will be available on the website, and once again, we'll put that in the chat box. And so right now, I am thrilled to invite and bring forward our panel that will be talking today with all of us about their roles as thought leaders on refugee self-reliance. So we will be bringing our panel forward with Jacob Bonyo from RefugePoint, Solenne Delga, Global Economic Advisor from the Danish Refugee Council, and Per Heggenes, CEO of the IKEA Foundation. As Dale mentioned in his opening, self-reliance for refugees is more important than ever, highlighting the need for inclusive societies and economies. But we know that this has not always been appreciated or pursued. And so we're happy today to have these thought leaders here with us today. And so I'm gonna welcome Per, who is up on the screen already. And Per, the IKEA Foundation is a leader in refugee response, and it providing funding for innovation, galvanizing deeper engagement from the private sector, and playing a unique influencer role. Most recently, the IKEA Foundation made a pledge at the Global Refugee Forum, committing 100 million euros to support refugees. Can you tell us how this pledge relates to self-reliance and sustainable livelihoods for refugees?
Okay, thank you, Kellie. Let me just start by congratulating Amy and Kellie and Sasha and the entire team for completing the first Refugee Self-Reliance Index. I think this is a great milestone, and I'm very excited about it, and excited about the fact that we've been part of it and that we have a tool that can be used to further the cause and in a different way than before. And I think at this point in time, it's probably more important than ever to focus on self-reliance. You know, we talk about COVID and the pandemic, and it sort of gets in the way of everything else. So in many of the countries where we operate with our programs, we will see that people in those countries have bigger challenges than COVID right now. And when you have every focus on COVID, then the focus on other things gets to play second fiddle. And we think that when we look at the underlying challenges and in many of these countries, it's really about people being concerned about being able to feed themselves and their family the next day, they're being able to build a livelihood for themselves that is the fundament for existing. And therefore, I think as we are challenging everyone through the COVID epidemic and the impact of that, and we are really trying to find ways to work around that and rebuild a future to new normal. I think entrepreneurs, and especially refugee entrepreneurs, will be absolutely essential in helping rebuild those livelihoods. Entrepreneurs will create jobs for themselves and create jobs from others, and for us to be able to support that would be extremely important in a COVID, after COVID world. So we continue to plan for refugee self-reliance. Actually, that's refugee livelihood is the only thing we do right now in our refugee space. That's all of the 100 million commitment will go towards refugee livelihood initiatives, and we would do that through 3 main pillars in our program. So the first pillar is really about driving innovation, looking for models, looking for ways to do things and to scale them. So we will invest in anchor programs, both in rural areas as well as in urban areas for refugee livelihood programs, and sort of find the right areas where we think we can plan and develop and be successful in building larger scale programs, which means we have to look for the enabling environments, we have to look for natural resources, we have to look for a local economy that can be linked to a larger value chain. So we try to take risks and drive innovation in areas where innovation is required and where typically the private sector is well suited to do that. The second area for us is about advocacy, and that links very nicely to what we're doing today. It's about how we, after having spent about 10 years working on the refugee situation in general, and working closely with UNHCR, RefugePoint, and many other partners, to actually use our voice and our support and support our partners to make the case for refugee self-reliance, and actually showing through research and through actually real examples, because seeing is believing, right? Real example that the integration of refugees in host communities is a better approach for everyone. That creates a win-win situation, and it makes the whole refugee situation very different. Actually, when you have a job as a refugee, in many ways you can say that's where you stop being a refugee and you integrate into the community and live a normal life together with everyone else around you. So the advocacy part is and will be important to us, taking what we have learned and advocate for a different approach to refugee settlement and refugee inclusion. And the third part is really about how we can play a role in driving integration and seeing how we can mainstream refugees into livelihood services and everything that's offered by governments in the host countries, and push that and just demonstrate that this is a win-win situation. This is a better approach, and it creates wins for everyone. So we continue to invest and push in this area, and hope that we can continue to offer evidence about what works and what doesn't work, and help drive policies and create market opportunities.
Wonderful. Thank you for outlining that, Per, and for being such a leader on refugee self-reliance. Solenne at Danish Refugee Council. The Danish Refugee Council is one of the world's largest humanitarian organizations and one of UNHCR's strategic partners. Most recently, the Global Compact on Refugees highlighted refugee self-reliance. How has this move towards self-reliance changed the work your organization is doing?
Thanks, Kellie. Hi, everybody. And before answering your question, I will take this opportunity to thank you and thank the entire team of the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative for inviting me on this panel, but also really engaging with DRC across the years. We're very excited to be here today and support the launch of the index. Back to your question around the compact. I think in terms of overarching strategic framework for DRC, the compact didn't come as a major shift, in the sense that we had been actively engaged in the durable solutions agenda for a very long time, and self-reliance was a key component of it. But the compact itself has come with many, many opportunities to reflect on and adapt the way we serve displacement-affected people and communities. I'm not going to go into the detail of what that looked like within GRC, but there were a couple of initiatives and change I want you to highlight today. First, I think what the GCR did, and hopefully will continue doing, particularly in the midst of the pandemic, was to reaffirm the political support and legitimacy of the core principle for refugee protection, and therefore opening and improving the dialogue with host governments around an enabling environment for refugee inclusion. And from our side, that has meant more heavily investing in building our advocacy, but also our legal aid capacity to improve access to rights for refugees. Specifically in countries of operations, we've been able to collaborate very closely with the government and duty bearers on the implementation of the CRF, the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework. We've been able to second people, for example, in the CRF Secretariat in Uganda. So this is really opening the door for us to engage on the enabling environment and advancing the rights agenda. I think the GCR also has accelerated and expanded our investments in the localization agenda in a view to supporting truly durable solutions. We've created a dedicated civil society engagement unit that supports the implementation of civil society-led responses. We've also built our capacity to better analyze and support local markets, really find these solutions Per was talking about in terms of what works and how we can scale it up. We've also prioritized engagement in multi-stakeholders coalition. Bringing actors together has been something very important in the compact. We've been able to do this at country, regional, global level. We really recognized that it is through leveraging the expertise and the capacity to innovate and the different perspective of actors that we will achieve better results. This is about reflecting on the role the private sector can play in promoting self-reliance for displacement-affected population, but it is also through bringing our different capacities, collaborating with UNHCR and other UN agencies, and really bringing the collective learning and expertise to achieve better results. And I think if I may just finish on one of the hugely important aspects of the GCR, that is the promotion of refugees and host communities as equal partners, and the very strong emphasis on participation of affected communities in the GCR. This is key. I mean, it's been discussed since, for a long time, but particularly since the Grand Bargain and the World Humanitarian Summit. It found even more core in the GCR. But I think it's important for us, especially considering today's topic conversation, that as part of this GCR, self-reliance is not always what people affected by displacement want. I think for some people, it's too risky to engage in self-reliance programming because they might be losing access to assistance. They don't have other safety nets. That risk factor is very important for us to consider, especially when we know that there is still so much that we need to understand and learn about what works and what doesn't. And I think the reason why I wanted to say this is not to minimize the importance of building self-reliance, but more to emphasize the importance of evidence-based programming and the need to systematically invest in generating that evidence. And I think the tool we're talking about today is really one way of doing this. And I will stop here. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Solenne, and also bringing up provocative components that we need to be thinking about. And it's so important as we continue to learn about through the Self-Reliance Index, but also about different programming that works. And also hearing, like you said, making sure that the affected communities themselves are feeding in and continuing to inform what we're doing with the index and also with our programming. And so that is a great lead-in to the question that I have for Jacob. Jacob from RefugePoint. RefugePoint has graduated thousands of refugees from assistance through your unique holistic program model in Nairobi. And you provide time-bound emergency assistance and livelihoods grants and support, and also case management. So you've been able to help people to the point of independence. And that means you're able to transition some of your resources to other people that are in need then, which is fantastic. Can you tell us a bit about the keys to success from that program?
Absolutely, Kelly. First of all, allow me to say asanteni to everyone participating in this. That's Swahili for thank you for joining us on this important step in what has been a 3-year journey to develop this tool. I'm sure one of many steps. Kelly, turning back to your question, the keys to our success, one has been measurement. It's a real key to our programming. As Amy and Dale noted earlier, RefugePoint and Women's Refugee Commission both had tools to measure self-resilience and self-reliance. The tool RefugePoint has used for years has actually shaped our programming. It helped us see where the gaps were in our programming, and we were then able to plan and pivot to fill those gaps. But even more fundamentally, the tool that we were using shifted our thinking about our services and what's possible for our clients from a care and maintenance approach to a self-reliance approach. It even helped clients themselves see their possibilities and focus on their strengths and skills rather than focusing on their vulnerabilities, as most programming pushes clients to do. Another key has been private funding. Private funding allows us the flexibility to test, iterate, add or change services, and overall change how we do things in accordance with the evolving needs and guidance from clients themselves. For example, in the current pandemic, private funding has enabled us to change our programming really quickly to respond to needs as clients communicate them in real time. And I think what I've mentioned as a last key to our success is case management, where every single household that comes into the program is assigned an individual case manager. And that case manager is their advocate, both internally and externally, helping to ensure that we accurately identify client potential and client needs, link that with appropriate supports at the right time, if those are available internally, and if not, through external linkages, and overall to act as a guiding and support mechanism for clients as they transition from vulnerability through stability and ultimately to self-reliance. Back to you, Kelly.
Jacob, just as a follow-up question, because of what Solenne said, but then also we have a question from Zena at Mercy Corps asking how refugees themselves have shaped some of your work. Can you talk a little bit more? You mentioned it, but can you talk a little bit more about how the refugees themselves inform the programs that you do?
Absolutely. As a kickoff point, we have refugee clients, refugees themselves amongst our staff members. And those refugees are serving a twin role as community navigators for the organization, and also within the community act as leaders and linkages between clients and supports in the community. They help to present a very authentic refugee voice within the organization and are participants in a lot of the decision making. On top of that, we have got a number of initiatives where we deliberately seek refugees' input in overall program design and in the design of initiatives. Annually, we go out and do targeted focus group discussions, and these would have a representation of a cross-section of refugees from different parts of Nairobi. We recently began an initiative where we seek client feedback on the appropriateness of the support that they are receiving from RefugePoint, and that's a totally separate collection mechanism. As we routinely engage with clients, we also seek their input on the components of the support. Through that, we've been able to very recently tweak some of our offerings. For example, we provide food support, and clients annually get an opportunity to weigh in on what they want included in the food basket, and we then see how to provide that. Very recently, in engagement with youth clients, we explored what kind of vocational training they wanted, and what came out of that was a very interesting surprise and has helped shape our vocational training support, where we have got clients chasing some very impressive dreams. I think the one that sticks in my mind the most currently is that we have a young man who wants to become a DJ in clubs. And so we are supporting him to pursue that through an academy that actually offers DJ services in Nairobi. In relation to this actual tool, we also were very deliberate about refugee involvement in the design and in the testing of the tool. Kellie, I know that in a lot of your early sessions in Nairobi, you engaged focus groups that included community leaders, included refugees themselves, and through that engagement found out, first of all, what parameters or indicators of well-being did the refugees themselves look at? What were they interested in us measuring as indicators of that self-reliance or well-being? Feedback on the actual questions, the language that we were using, the overall acceptability of the tool. And that was a feature that continued to be implemented at every step of testing. So
thank you, Jacob. Fantastic, that's great, thank you. And also for highlighting how it is fed in, refugee voices fed in directly to the index. And that leads me to a question to pair around the index itself. IKEA Foundation has been a leading funder of the Self-Reliance Index and of the initiative more broadly. The IKEA staff have been engaged not only from a funding perspective, but as thought partners in the creation of the index and in the overall vision of the initiative. So coming back to what you were saying earlier in terms of your priority, why did you find support to this community and measurement tool worthy of your investment? And how do you hope to see this develop in the future?
Oh, okay. You know, we always put a lot of emphasis on building evidence and learning from what we do. So I give an example. When we started working with our long-term partner UNHCR in the south of Ethiopia on a large livelihood development program, which has been going on for 8 or 9 years, we decided to go out and ask Oxford University to evaluate that program. Not because we wanted to know exactly whether we succeeded on all points or not, but to actually be sure that we capture the learning and we can take that learning and share it with others, because it was a big investment, took a long time, which is also, I think, to remind ourselves that you don't create these programs in a year. You need to have multi-year funding and multi-year initiatives to actually change the situation for large groups of refugees. In this case, 220,000 refugees and 200,000 host community, where we made a point of doing the same thing for the host community as for the refugees to not only diffuse the conflict, but to drive that collaboration that is leads to sustainable integration of refugees. So that report is available for anyone who is interested, and it's just an example of how we are pretty keen on continue to invest in building evidence so that we can all learn from what works and what doesn't work, and we can be more effective in how we make investments in the future. So having said that, it was a natural thing for us to support this initiative. Not only has RefugePoint a great reputation and they're a trusted partner, but it was a typical kind of investment that a private sector should do. Private sector philanthropy lends itself very well to support these kind of investments that are sort of out of the box, but at the same time, if done well, has a huge potential to improve the work and the situation for lots of people. So that was basically why we invested in the Self-Reliance Index, and we're happy that we've done that. And we really hope that this becomes a platform for many people to use, many organizations to use, that we can really make an effort to communicate this to organizations and you make sure it gets used in programming around self-reliance for refugees around the world. And also that you make sure that the tool is adaptive. So as we learn more, we can change the tool and improve the tool and continue to improve it as a key tool for everyone to do better programming in the future. So we hope this can help us to as a tool to lead to better pathway for self-reliance for refugees. And we hope this can also be used to explore how it can link to the larger, as I talked about before, the larger national livelihood strategies and economies, and offer insights also into governments about integrating and mainstreaming refugee communities can be a win-win situation for everyone.
Great, thank you. And you talked, Per, about that learning component. And so I want to move to Solenne at DRC, because DRC has been such a critical partner in that learning process. So the Danish Refugee Council has been a key partner in the development of this tool. And so, Solenne, from your perspective, I know you've been a big proponent of the Self-Reliance Index. So from your perspective, why were you and why was the organization itself interested in being a key partner in investing resources, your time resources, to helping us to develop that tool, to develop the tool and the learning associated with it?
Thanks, Kellie. I'm not sure I'm going to add a lot to what has already been said, but maybe highlighting what have been very key appealing factors. First, really recognizing the potential of the Self-Reliance Index to ensure that affected communities would remain at the center, that we would be programming and advocating based on evidence that is generated with the refugee voice Jacob was talking about. That was one. And the second key driver has already been mentioned as well. Such tools just didn't exist. We had been promoting self-reliance for a very long time, but we were using sector-specific outcome monitoring when we know that people don't live in sectors, and we needed to find a way to have a more comprehensive measure. So these were the key drivers, I think, but we also had very important enabling factors. And I'm saying this as well for others that haven't tried working with it yet. But it was really empowering to have commitment from leadership in the organization, to have country operations that were willing to contribute the time. Because I might have spent a bit of time over the past few years, but I think my colleagues, especially in DRC Jordan, have spent much more time than me. So I think having that willingness at country level was very important. We also had our global meal unit has been and was looking at the possibility of developing a global results framework for the organization. And so there was something about the possibility of the universality of the tool that was very appealing to us. And finally, and I think it's been said before, but we got also very important support from flexible donors. We were able to pilot in a program funded by BKRM in Istanbul. Our partnership agreement with Danida was also key to ensure that we could try it out. So we had several enabling factors. And I think more importantly, as we continue engaging with the initiative, we saw more and more potential. And that was also a very important aspect of us continuing to engage. The tool itself, as we've been saying, is key and a really good way of engaging with the target population. We are able to collect feedback and to learn from them, and it's really bringing life to this participation and accountability agenda. I think also what started as a measurement tool, and you were saying it, Kellie, also became a design tool. It helped us really recognize and take into consideration the multi-dimension of self-reliance, help us go beyond these sector silos and advance an integrated programming approach. So that was very, very important. The final part of that was also that through our experience, we realized there was a case for the institutionalization of the Self-Reliance Index, in the sense that even if it's meant to be easy to use, it is still quite heavy. And it will always come in addition to project monitoring systems where we focus on operational challenges to be able to adapt the management of our programs. Therefore, I think it's essential that the SRI is actually built into M&E frameworks so that we reduce as much as possible the burden of data collection on people of concern. That was one, and I think the other part that really speaks in favor of institutionalizing the SRI is staff turnover. And we don't want the SRI to be linked to only one single project. It's really about ensuring that we retain the experience with the tool and we're able to monitor progress towards self-reliance over time. So that's also for me to say that looking forward, I don't think as of today we can say that the tool is being institutionalized within DRC because it's still relatively new and we have tested it only at small scale. But our experience had confirmed its validity and relevance to our work. And we are including the SRI in many proposals It's incorporated into our framework agreement with the NIDA for the Syria response in Jordan, Turkey, Lebanon. Our teams have been trained, our ongoing training at the moment. And most importantly, and I've seen some question of the chat, so I will allow myself to respond here. We really think that, as Per was saying as well, COVID-19 is maybe potentially removing focus on self-reliance. Understandably for many different reasons, but we also really believe it's accelerating the need to focus on building self-reliance. DRC has published a global appeal, and we have committed to report against it. And we will report numbers of people reached, because that's easier and that's what we need to do. But we really also have the ambition to bring depth to our understanding of how this pandemic is affecting the situation of the people we want to serve. And we think that if in a couple of countries we're able to still generate data through the Self-Reliance Index to see how the pandemic is impacting life and self-reliance capacity, this will also be amazing. So yeah.
Thank you. And I just want to add just quickly, before I go to our last question to Jacob, given the time, we've received a number of questions from participants asking about the graduation approach. And RF4 from UNHCR asked how the SRI can be used with the graduation approach. So Solenne and I have been working together with the Poverty Alleviation Coalition that is being led by UNHCR and focused on the graduation approach to see how we can make some additions to the Self-Reliance Index so that we can use the Self-Reliance Index in its entirety and integrity, but have some complement to it so that the graduation approach can use the Self-Reliance Index. So that's something I just want to add on to what you said, Solenne, that's something that we're working on together and excited about that opportunity. So I'm going to go to the last question to Jacob. Jacob, RefugePoint has been working together with us very closely to develop the Self-Reliance Index. As you noted, you already had a monitoring tool, but how has the Self-Reliance Index contributed to your approach, and how has it changed your approach in some of the work that you're doing?
Thanks, Kellie. The Self-Reliance Index is a better, more robust version of what we've already been using. And we see a lot of potential for the increased parameters being measured, for the robustness of the data being collected to help us to continue building an evidence base for what works best. We aim to use that evidence to inform and shape our programming, make sure that we are actually responding to as many aspects of clients' needs as we possibly can. And where we are unable to do that in-house, to ensure that we set up the external linkages so that that can actually happen. And we're also eager with the adoption of the Self-Reliance Index to work with others in Nairobi and in the region who are going to use the tool so that we can learn from them and share our learnings as we evolve our programming. Back to you, Kellie.
Great, thank you. And I recognize that there are many questions and in the chat box that we're not able to get to today, but we will take note of those, and we hope that you will reach out to us through the Self-Reliance Index website, and so that we can continue this conversation, because there is a lot of learning still to be done about refugee self-reliance more generally and about the tool itself. So I want to thank you, Jacob, Solenne, and Per, very much for being part of this panel, but also for sharing your experiences, but also for your ongoing engagement with the in development of the index, but more generally with the initiative more widely. So thank you so much for your thought leadership and for your time today. And so I'll hand back over to you, Sasha, to close us out. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, everybody. I'm going to share some closing remarks, but I also wanted to make a point right now. First of all, Per, it's wonderful to see you here. Solenne, thank you so much. And Jacob, Kellie, Dale, Amy, this has been just such a terrific and important conversation. The point that I wanted to make is that when you approach assistance from the perspective of self-reliance, it changes the conversation. That conversation goes from asking a refugee, why did you flee? What have you gone through? And here's a handout, to a different conversation. Who are you? What skills do you have? What experience do you have? What can you bring to the table to help yourself? And that shift is a fundamental shift towards dignity and towards personal agency. And that's such a critical piece of what we need to do today. So the creation of the Self-Reliance Index answers what I think of as a primary call of the Global Compact on Refugees, and that is to forge collaborative efforts. This is more important than ever. Over 71 million people are displaced and durable solutions are vanishing for refugees. We are at a pivot point in the world. An aid to help people survive, which is necessary at the outset of a crisis and the norm, is not relevant for the long-term nature of displacement today. The way we've done things in the past can't be how we do things in the future. COVID-19 is teaching us some urgent lessons. The first is that we have to respond to crises collectively. No one is safe in this pandemic until we're all safe. And we know that we're most effective when we act in a coordinated, united way. The second lesson is that solutions need to rest in the hands of those impacted. So what's a realistic future for refugees that we can imagine? The main features have already come into focus. Building on the Sustainable Development Goals and their guidance to leave no one behind, the Global Compact on Refugees highlights self-reliance as a new pillar of humanitarian response. That's also what the majority of refugees around the world tell us that they want. So there's a broad recognition that we need a paradigm shift today towards self-reliance. So the question is, how do we get there? The direction is clear, but the path actually isn't. The Self-Reliance Index, we think, can help build that path. Measurement and evidence will lay the foundation. In places like Jordan, Kenya, Ecuador, and in regions around the world, this tool can help define the most effective approaches so those can be scaled up, so that we have a map for the future that others can follow, blueprints for humanitarian response. What can the future look like for refugees themselves? We know because a number of organizations that are part of this effort have already helped refugees to become self-reliant. When that happens, children are in school, there's income, there's food on the table, there's access to health and basic needs are met, and there's more protection for women and girls. Overall, there's a sense of dignity. You can see it in people's eyes. In this time of COVID-19, we know that the people who are on a path to self-reliance already are much better off than those who were dependent on aid. There's a gap today between the harsh reality of the world and what we imagine the world could be. Working together, we can close that gap. We can get the world a little closer to the one we imagine. The first UN High Commissioner for Refugees feared that without solutions, humanitarians were forced to, as he said, administer misery. Today, together with refugees themselves and the Self-Reliance Initiative and all the partners and the momentum we've created, we can envision a different and realistic future, one that's grounded in hope, dignity, and inclusion. So thank you everyone today for your participation. We want to leave you with a few action points. And so here they are. One is that you can visit our website to download the tool. You can also find a blog post we put up today, and please share that. We also have a list of other launch events planned over the next month, and you can join those. I'll mention those here. They include co-hosting a discussion with the Ugandan organization YARI for refugee-led organizations next week, as Kellie mentioned. On June 10th, we're also co-hosting a webinar with Mercy Corps and other partners in Jordan to discuss self-reliance in the Middle East. On June 11th, we're co-hosting a webinar with the REDS Network and RefugePoint to discuss self-reliance in East Africa. We also have a Twitter chat on June 17th and a technically focused deep dive into the Self-Reliance Index on June 18th. So we hope to see all of you and many of you there. Please share this out widely, and thank you so much again for joining us today.